Okay, in the interest of time, let's get going here. Thank you everyone for joining us again today. My name's Mike Smitherman. Also got Marius Moscovici with me here again. Hi, Marius.
Hello, Mike. Glad to be doing this again.
So the last in our series that we've been doing around governance and usage of BI, and this is webinar number 6, I think it is, where we're going to be looking at crafting user experiences for your NBI consumers. Usual housekeeping things. Everyone is on mute as we have a pretty big audience as usual. Feel free to enter questions into the chat or Q&A. We'll get round to those towards the end. We are recording this. The full series is available up on our YouTube channel, and this one we'll send out a link to post-webinar. I think that's all the housekeeping. So, Marius, I'll kick it over to you to start.
Thank you, Mike. So, welcome everyone. Today, we're going to talk about something very important and demystify some of the issues around adoption and engagement with BI. It's really an area that is not well understood. We don't believe, which is and it's a chronic issue that plagues most BI environments, and it's exemplified by this 20% ceiling issue, right? And Forrester, in July of last year, they published an analysis that said that, well, while the self-service percentage for non-IT professionals, it's from a BI perspective, has been increasing, it kind of over the last 10 years, the last decade, it went up to maybe about 20%. It's petered out there. So it's really not, we're not achieving across the industry anywhere near wide-scale adoption of BI by the business. And if you think that that's, well, maybe an anomaly, well, there's an even more depressing study that just came out in November of 2025 by Bark, where they surveyed lots of enterprises and they found that, well, in fact, only 16% of staff in large enterprises are regularly using BI. I mean, think about that. That means 84% are not regularly using the business intelligence that's out there. So clearly, there's something wrong. And if you needed even another data point, Deloitte did a study, I think it was a few years ago. They were looking at, well, it's just senior managers. Surely you say, well, maybe in my organization I've got lots of folks, but surely the senior managers are using that. And well, no. In fact, even the senior managers, 3/4 of those are surveyed, say, well, they're not really comfortable accessing or using data from their tools and resources, generically, right? So there's a very big issue here. And I think fundamentally, before we kind of talk about how to address some of these things, it's important to try to think about why this is happening. Um, and it's also important to understand that, in fact, just doing more of what we've been doing so far, which is, go publish, go create another dashboard, go build a dashboard for this area. Oh, let's use a different tool to create an even nicer dashboard than we have now. That isn't going to solve the problem because that's exactly what we've been doing so far. So we first have to start from the realization more dashboards is not the answer. And then we have to ask, well, why is this happening? And I would posit to you that fundamentally the analytics organizations and the business organizations in your enterprise and most enterprises are really speaking different languages when it comes to value generated from business intelligence. And this is not like one of those situations where an AI translator is going to work for you on your phone, right? It's just that there's a different fundamental paradigm and framing around what value means. So what do I mean by that? Well, for most analytics leaders, if you ask them, well, how do you measure sort of, the ROI that you're generating from your investment in business intelligence and AI related to business intelligence, they will tell you that, well, it's all about enabling capabilities, right? So they look at return on investment or ROI, but because you can't measure if classically ROI like in a with a dollar value in most BI applications, and you can't say, well, I saved this many millions of dollars because I created this particular solution, or I generated this amount of revenue. Very seldom is there a situation where some dashboard you create or some data set you created has done that. You tend to look at more enabling capabilities, right? So they say, oh, we published this new really valuable integrated data warehouse data asset that then all of these analysts and the business folks can go and do their analysis on. Or maybe they say, well, we got ROI this year by generating and turning on the ability for people to do self-service reporting. Previously they were using an archaic business intelligence tools in Excel, and now we've got all these people that are all this availability around Power BI, and so there's this great self-service capability here. Or maybe more recently, people might be saying, well, hey, we deployed some AI powered chatbots. We used Microsoft Fabric or Genie in Databricks or Snowflake Intelligence or something like that, and we put this capability out there where now people can go and ask their questions in natural language and get their answers through their data. So it's all about sort of enablement and capability. But if you look at the business side of things and you really say, well, how do they really think about value they're getting from business intelligence? It's really not ROI. It's what I would call ROE, return on effort, right? And where what return means is, how many insights, how much insight am I getting that can help inform my business decisions? What's the value there from real useful insights? And the effort is how much do I need to do to get there? It's the clicks, the time that's spent, the cognitive overhead that's required to generate those insights. Right. And if I've got a low amount of effort required to generate insights and I can generate lots of insights, then that's great because that's generates value for me. There's also a flywheel effect there because I'm likely to go back and use those systems over and over. If it's a very low return on effort where I'm spending a ton of time and I'm getting very few insights, I'm probably not going to be using BI, and that's really the problem. Right? In most organizations, if you were to ask them even qualitatively, what kind of return are you getting on your effort, they would say it's quite low, right? And so there's this hidden tax on insights that we really have to understand, get our arms around, and tackle head on if we're going to change the fundamentals around this dynamic that we just talked about around these studies, right? And so what do I mean by that? Well, let's imagine for a moment that you were to chart the return on effort for users on the y-axis, and on the x-axis is kind of the level of effort, the amount of time as it elapses as they're doing things, right? And you just were to take a particular user, maybe a sales manager or something like that, and say, well, okay, let's take a look, let's watch them and see what they're doing. So they start their day or they start a particular task, they have a question. The first thing they have to do is find a dashboard, right? And that takes some time. They've got to look through either the catalog of dashboards, sift through and figure out which is the right one to look at to try to analyze a particular area that they're interested in. Maybe they're looking through a bunch of bookmarks if they've got it. They're getting through what oftentimes is a pretty cluttered BI ecosystem just to try to find a right dashboard to look at. Once they find the dashboard, they open it up and then they got to wait for it to load, right? And if it has a lot of data behind it, sometimes that's not a non-trivial amount of time. So there's time they're spending sort of kind of waiting, a little spinny there. Once that dashboard is loaded, now they got to go, well, okay, there's probably like 10 filters on this thing in this dashboard. I'm interested in one particular slice of the data, my territory, my area. So let me go in and kind of apply all my filters and go take a look at the data. And if they're lucky, if they pick the right dashboard, if they're looking at it on a day where it actually provides something useful, maybe they generate an insight, a first insight. They go, oh, well, look at that. My pipeline isn't growing anywhere near as expected. I'm not going to be able to meet my target the way this is going. I've got to really do something about this, right? So then that generates some value. I've gotten a little bit of ROE after spending all this time. But then the next thing I've got to do, naturally, is to say, well, why is this happening, right? The why question comes right after the what question. And so now I've got to go on another journey. And I've got to find, what is the related dashboard that might tell me that answer? Because a lot of times it's not on that first dashboard that I looked at. So I'm sifting through dashboards. And the whole time I'm doing that, my ROE goes down, right? Because I'm spending more and more time and I'm not getting in from incremental value. This ROE calculation is front loaded with effort and back loaded with value. So slowly trending towards zero. And again, if I'm lucky, after I find the related dashboard and I reapply the right filters to that dashboard, maybe I then get some particular insight that tells me, hey, aha, my lead quality has dropped and I need to do something about that. Let me go talk to my sales reps and figure out why, or my marketing team rather, and figure out why we're getting leads that are not as high quality as they were last time, or whatever that might be. So I've got to cross-reference those results and look at those. So this is an typical journey. You can apply, of course, any kind of business problem to it, and it fits in this paradigm. And so the question then becomes, well, then how much time do I really have here? What does this represent? We don't have real numbers there. What information do we have about how much time are people willing to go through this process to get return on effort, right? And so that we can understand the hidden tax of that, and we should understand that this time where it's spent is going to have a very specific impact. So if you that first stage, right? That going, if there's a long time between the beginning of my journey and the time when I get my first insight, the fact that, hey, my something's wrong here or something I need to look at. Well, in that scenario, you risking a chance of user abandoning the analysis completely, right? They're like, I don't have time for this. I got to do other things. They get distracted. They get pulled away, right? So then they've got no value at all. If they get something out of that, but then the second stage, the ability to find the why takes too long, right? Then something else happens. Instead, they go, well, I need to figure out what's going on, but I can't figure it out from these dashboards. Let me reach out to this BI analyst and ask them to figure it out, right? So they shoot off an email or a Teams message or whatever. And now, instead of you getting a lot of value out of that self-service investment, in fact, all this work has been delegated to a BI analyst who's just going to try to find the report for them and send it to them and waste their time on that. So both of these things kind of reduce the return on effort overall and the value that's generated for the business. So the question is, well, what is that time to first insight, you might ask? Well, how much time do I have to generate that first insight? Well, there's some pretty bad news here in the sense that if you look at the studies that are out there, right? All the way back in 2004, there was some famous research that was done by Dr. Gloria Marks and her research team at UCI, where they went and they actually sat behind a whole bunch of knowledge workers that thousands and thousands of hours of observations, and they looked at what is the amount of time that people will spend on a given task before they context switch, before they go and they close that tab, they move to something else, they kind of move on, right? And they found that on average, it was about 2.5 minutes. That's about the average time that people will spend on a task before they kind of just switch tabs and go to do something else. Doesn't sound like a lot of time until you look at the fact that they repeated that research after the advent of social media, right? 2004 was before social media was really huge. Um, and then in 2023, in a book that she published, documented that they had found that the average time had dropped to 47 seconds, right? 47 seconds. So, well, under a minute that you get that. In fact, I believe the median, that's the average, the median was like 40 seconds before people would switch from the thing that they were working on to go do something else. And if you think about it intuitively, it makes sense. And think about how many interruptions you get, email, buzzing from email, Slack, Teams, social media stuff coming in, texts, and so on and so forth, right? So the interruptions, the amount of focus time is incredibly small, and you have to really ask yourself in this context, if you think about your analytics environment, you're honest and you said, well, what's the likelihood that your business users are going to get value out of the dashboards that you've given them and generate that initial insight within a minute, right? Less than a minute, like 40 seconds. It's not very high. And at that point, you've lost 50% of your audience, right? And again, if they repeat that experience a few times, they're not going to use the dashboards at all, right? Because they can't get the value fast enough. So they just assume there is no value there. So the name of the game is, how do we accelerate time to insight, especially that first insight, and how do we make it as fast as possible for people then to get to the why? Right? That's the name of the game. That's what we got to do if we're going to be successful in taking these abysmal statistics that, based on this framing, feel absolutely correct, right? And transforming into something where you have BI systems that are actually generating value for the business. So to do that, to accelerate time to insight, there are just a few things, right? It's all about minimizing clicks. If I've got to go and, remember the path, if I've got to go into, okay, which workspace do I go? Oh, yeah, is this Power BI or Tableau report? Oh, it's a Power BI report. Or let me figure out which workspace is it in. Okay, let me click that. Which report is it in here? I don't remember. Let me organize it. If it's that kind of process, or I've got 100 bookmarks and I got to figure out which one I go to, that's, if there's a lot of clicks, that's a problem. So doing that, reducing the cognitive load, right? So cognitive load takes time. If I have to think about what I need to do next, where do I need to go to be able to answer the question that I have, then that in and of itself slows down the process and makes it more likely that I get to that 40-second mark where I'm going to be going to do something else, right? And then obviously from the point where I've got some value, how do you can then link very easily to get to the why faster, right? So I can go, okay, this is going on. Why is it happening, right? So with that in mind, we'll posit that you need to rethink the entire design paradigm. And rather than like the traditional, I'm going to build a dashboard for a user and it's going to, have this kind of, I'm going to make it visually aesthetic. I'm going to think about the kinds of questions that it answers, and I'm just going to, create charts that answer those questions. That we've got to do a lot more. And instead, we've got to deal with kind of this user journey, which is tailor-made around the way people actually work in their role. So that means making sure that the analytics experience for them has relevancy in it. So as a user, I need the things just that are meaningful to me. I don't want to have to go through, the sea of content where majority of it is irrelevant to me, just to find the little needle in the haystack that's relevant to me. So keep everything just focused on what's relevant for me as my role, right? Second, and this is very important, we need to shift the paradigm from thinking of like which dashboards do you need to make accessible to this users, to having more of a KPI first view. So which KPIs do I need to present to this user is a much more powerful question, because if I'm tracking as a business user 20 KPIs and I have those at my fingertips and I look at them and I can see which ones are in the red, I immediately get that initial insight that something's going south, and I can go know what I need to do with my further analysis. If instead you're giving me 20 dashboards, now I've got all that clicking action of opening up each dashboard, applying those filters, taking a look to see, is there anything useful going on? Does this metric trend in the right direction? Oh no, this one is saying exactly the same thing we were saying yesterday. Okay, I got no value out of that. All that effort I put in. Let's go on to the next dashboard. And maybe I'll do that for one or two dashboards. I'm not going to do that for 20. I'm not going to do that for 10. And I'm certainly going to get through that 47 seconds very quickly and then abandon, right? So starting with KPIs first and going to dashboards when there's the need for detailed analysis, or using other tools like AI for detailed analysis. That's a very important premise. The third premise is personalization. So when we say relevancy, we should understand the fact that you might have a good starting point for users. You might say, well, okay, I know that these are the KPIs that are important to my senior management or this particular job function. I can give that to them. But in reality, over time, there's drift there. Simply because as a business user, I might have something going on right now, so therefore, some critical business crisis or business priority has changed, and so there's a new set of KPIs that are more interesting to me that I don't usually look at, or some things become less relevant, business changes. So it's very important to be able to provide capabilities for users to be able to personalize their own experience, right? To be tracking and looking at the things that they care about, have those things at their fingertips, both from a KPI and a dashboard perspective. Again, minimizing the amount of time to get to insight. And then finally, having this approach where you want to be thinking about this so that it's device appropriate. So if your audience is spending a whole bunch of time on mobile, if you've got people on the road, if you've got people that are not sitting at their desk all the time, their meetings all the time, you need to make it possible for them to get to that information on mobile, right? And so that they can in the 1 minute as they're walking from one meeting to another, go check on what's going on in their metrics and KPIs and go there. So that you're fitting into the little context time that they have while they're when they're context switching between one activity to another in their day-to-day life, right? So thinking about experiences that work well for mobile, assuming that the user base is geared towards that kind of experience. So far, we've talked about this in a general way. And what we're going to do for the rest of the webinar here is that Mike is going to show you, with real examples, how these particular principles really work and how you generate experiences that effectively maximize value and increase and maximize the return on effort.
Yeah, thanks, Marius. Share my screen here. Alex, your comment in the chat, I think, is relevant as well. That Slack is a big distraction that is exacerbating the issue when those DMs pop up every day. Um, can't disagree with that for sure. Um, okay, so as Mary said, what I want to do is take you, for those that have been on the series, you will have seen some of the stuff, but take you through kind of the metric insights world and how our customers are addressing the issues that Marius has been talking about. Um, and I'll lay some foundational pieces just in case we've got anyone new on the webinar around kind of what the prereqs are almost to creating some of these journeys and these experiences that we'll go through. And then we'll jump into some specific examples that might give you some ideas. So um, what you're looking at here, for those that are familiar with it, this will resonate. Is the Metric Insights catalog. So, the foundational piece of any sort of experience is making sure that the content that you are providing is sort of governed and certified and the correct reports and dashboards and metrics that you want your users using. So what you're looking at here is our catalog where governed content gets published. So each of these tiles in the middle of the screen here is a particular asset from any source of BI or data in the organization. And you'll see I've got a bunch of things from Power BI and Tableau and SharePoint and documents on file stores published in here. This content typically gets published in a certified way, as I just mentioned. So hovering over the tile here, I can, have confidence that anything that's in here has gone through a checks and balances process that has got a stamp of approval that has been certified by someone. So we know this is content that we can trust not only to access, but to use in some of the views that I'm going to show you. Something else that you'll see when we drill into the experiences is that when we publish content, we pick up and we add metadata around what the content is. So descriptions, glossary terms, ownership, categorization of the data. Is it sensitive information? Does it contain PII data? All of that is sort of critical information to users of the content. So we make sure we sort of display that at the point of consumption and at the point that they may be, if I drill into this particular Power BI dashboard here, where we embed it within the environment, making sure that all that information again is available as I'm analyzing a particular dashboard. So a key piece is making sure that we're working with the right content. A lot of BI environments are messy. There's lots of tools, there's lots of systems. Let's make sure we're curating the right content for users to start with. I'm going to touch on a couple of additional things before we jump into these experiences because these manifest themselves in the experiences that I'm going to show you. Um, Filters, Mary spoke about this in the slides. Typically, filtering of data is a task that needs to happen as you're analyzing metrics and data through dashboards or however. And so something we do when we collect, when we publish content, is we also understand what filters are available within any content that we're putting out there. So in this case, you'll see I've got channel, country, another one, product under here. And within our portal environment, we're able to effectively link filters together across content. So in the catalog, even if I go and say pick a particular channel and filter this Power BI dashboard by that channel, and I go back to the catalog and maybe I go into a report in Tableau and I access that report in Tableau, it will recognize any common filters that exist between those bits of content and persist the slice of data that I was looking at. So yeah, that's something we do in the catalog that becomes, again, quite important when we go and look at these experiences. So governed content is key. Something else that you're going to see as we go through these views is the concept that Marius brought up of metrics and KPIs as well. So something that we do within our catalog is that we don't just publish reports and dashboards from third-party tools. We can also extract metrics and KPIs and summarize them, in this case, within the catalog as well, but also use them in the views that we're going to look at. So you'll see some tiles here where we've got numbers on them. This is a metric that we've actually generated, we've identified as a KPI that we're going to use within our environment that is coming from, say, a Power BI dashboard or a Tableau workbook, or could be coming from an underlying database as well. But it's something that we have identified as a key metric, a key performance indicator that we want to track over time and that we're going to use in these experiences to help guide users to the content and to the answers they might be looking for. So these metrics are obviously time series type data, often again highly dimensionalized. Something we do within the product is we have an alerting capability where you can start to apply rules to these metrics and look for how they're changing over time, start to alert people when those changes happen. So that's kind of the foundational piece. Govern content and metrics in a central place through the Metric Insights portal and catalog here. But what we really want to do now is on a persona by persona basis, start sort of customizing these views to particular types of users in the organization. I'm going to start sort of layering on some of the things that Marius spoke about and what makes the experience more compelling to users, because any user coming into this might have access to ultimately hundreds if not thousands of reports across the organization, and it's unfeasible to think that they would be able to look at all that every day. So there's a couple of things that we want to look at. The first is just at a general level. And I'm sure you do this within your dashboards and reports today, but if we're going to include those into this sort of portal and catalog concept, making the environment familiar to users is important. And I'm talking about things like branding and logos and colors and fonts. We don't want to be dropping people into an experience that is strange to them, that is unfamiliar to them. So, in our environment, we have the concept of themes that can be applied to different personas and different users and departments across the organization, where effectively we can brand any experience that we're going to look at, even the catalog itself, with the appropriate colors, fonts, logos that they're going to be familiar with. So sort of a table stakes thing again. But, if you're going to push something out like this, again, make it something that's familiar or meaningful to them. Um, so let's go and look at some examples now of how we might start to sort of take that catalog view and customize it into some of these, as we call them, custom apps for different personas. Um, so the first one I'm going to talk about is extending almost extending the catalog view to extract key elements from reports and dashboards that might be interesting to a particular persona. So what you're looking at here will look similar to where we were just in the catalog. So on the left-hand side, I've got access to all the categories of reports and contents that I have access to. We've put some, helpful folders in here, like things that I recently look at or the most popular content out there. I can favorite content. But we also have included now this sort of homepage concept where maybe for different personas, and this is based around some Power BI content that we've pulled in, for different personas, maybe we want to bubble up certain charts and tables or views from the different Power BI dashboards that a certain user might be interested in this case, Andrew. So each of these tiles here is a particular live chart from a Power BI dashboard that we've created that we have, in this case, deemed interesting to this Andrew persona. So I've got 6 charts now coming from potentially 6 different dashboards, excuse me, from Power BI rendering on the screen here for this user. And I might have, different homepage tabs over on the left here based on my role. But we can start to curate things from the overall catalog and again put them in a single screen for users and have that as their homepage when they come into the catalog. We might give them the functionality to further refine that for their particular needs. So maybe we give them sort of a superset of charts from our content that we know in this case, if I'm the sales manager, is stuff that is relevant to me as a sales manager. We've pre-selected these 6 because we think these are the most important to me. But as Marius said, things drift over time, and maybe there are additional metrics, or I want to change the metrics that are available on this page to me, and I can do that and then I'll save that as a personal view. And again, these are live charts here. In the old world, I potentially would have had to go to 6 different dashboards in Power BI or even multiple tools to see these charts embedded somewhere in a dashboard. So bubbling up elements of the reports and dashboards that you have already on a persona by persona basis, and allowing allowing users to customize that to their particular needs. So that might be one example where you can start to guide people in the right direction. Another common example is particularly, maybe at your exec or your management level where they have sort of multi-departmental responsibilities, oftentimes to sort of analyze across that spectrum of content, it will require going to, if not, multiple tools sometimes. Our HR department is using ServiceNow for reporting. Our sales team is using Tableau in Salesforce. Our marketing team does all their stuff in Power BI. So potentially to go and look cross-departmentally, I have to go to different tools. But even if you're standardizing more, I'm going to have to look across different areas of dashboards and reports to understand how things are performing. Well, again, sort of similar to the previous screen, if I'm in this case a regional manager looking across maybe different regions that I'm responsible for, let's start to mash up content from those different tools or those different reports and place some relevant information together on the page. So what you're looking at here is a Tableau chart sheet that we've pulled in. I've got a couple of Power BI reports. I've got a third tool on the right here. All of these we've deemed, as we saw before, have a common filter available with them. In this case, are the different regions I'm interested in and responsible for, and so make it easy for me to, excuse me, look across departments, filter by those regions that I'm responsible for in one go, even though this content again exists in this case in multiple tools and reports and dashboards. So mash up content, filter, pull in common filters, provide a single view of the world. And again, as a regional manager, maybe this is my homepage when I come in here and what I look at every day. Third example. Maybe I'm a sales and marketing exec here, or I'm responsible again cross-departmentally. So, in the catalog of things I have access to, maybe it's, sort of the sales and marketing reports that are most interesting to me on a daily basis. So don't complicate my world showing me every category of content I have access to. Make it easy to jump to the reports and dashboards that I look at on a daily basis, so that I can flip through them easily. Even again, if they may be coming from different tools and technologies, I don't have to go hunting for them. But also maybe bring in the concept of the metrics and KPI focused approach that we spoke about before. So again, maybe I'm cross-departmental here, responsible for a number of areas of the business across different regions and channels and product groups that I'm interested in. Um, and let's bubble up those metrics for those different departments and areas of the business. So what you're looking at here is a summary screen where each of these metrics might be coming from a different report in a different tool or technology. They may be coming directly from the database, but we've bubbled it all up onto one page. We're doing some analysis against those metrics. So maybe you have targets. You're looking at, measuring metrics against targets. Maybe you're simply looking at how they've changed over time, like we are here. Um, but we can give this summary view that sort of pulls people into what's red. So rather than having to go through what have we got here, 16 different reports every day, looking through the metrics in those reports and figuring out what's under or overperforming, my eye is immediately drawn to what's red here. I could go and filter to different areas of the business. If I wanted to go and look at the same thing across the UK versus Canada, if I'm responsible for that, I can change these filters. But ultimately, I can drill into the things that draw my attention to them, in this case, because they're red, and get taken to the underlying dashboard that that metric was associated with, also with those filter values pre-selected, so that I don't have to, jump back to, okay, what was I looking at? Canada. Okay, let me pre-filter to that again and pick out corporate sales and get to the same point that I was looking at. So using metrics as a sort of guiding function to not have to look through 20 different reports every day, focus on the ones that have had changes and drill through to the content with context, with filter context, so that I can start my analysis in a much more relevant place. Final example is giving a more sort of self-service approach to that metric paradigm. So here's an example where maybe we give people a blank slate to start with, but we say, okay, in your world in your business, in your world, in your domain within the organization, there's a sort of superset of metrics and dimension metrics that you are ultimately probably interested in, um, and let the user sort of dictate what is the things that they want to track on a day-to-day basis. Obviously letting them navigate through what could be a large set of metrics by categorizing them or assigning them by department or role. Let the user self-select on this area, so that they can pick and choose sort of a home page of metrics that they want to track on a day-to-day basis. So I've done this. This will now save this for me. I've got, again, the metrics that I'm interested in, how they're performing, any of that metadata that we spoke about before that is sort of bubbled through to these metrics. Again, these metrics may be coming from more detailed dashboards and reports. So pick the metrics that I'm interested in. Allow me to set some sort of default views on this as well. So rather than having to look at all the metrics that I'm interested in every day, well, bring me into the ones that are not performing at this point in time. So save that sort of filter on it. Um, but ultimately define a view where every day I can come in and, in this case, show me any metrics, bubble up any metrics that I'm interested in that have changed significantly or haven't performed on that day. And again, I could drill through these and look at the underlying content that's associated with them. I haven't had to go through 100 different metrics to figure out what's going on here. So there's some examples sort of in the browser of ways of sort of, again, making it familiar, bubbling up what's important, pulling out key metrics, and sort of leading the horse to water a little bit in terms of where they should focus their attention on a day-to-day basis. I'm just going to try and share my phone here and show you sort of how this might manifest on the mobile device as well. Just bear with me 1 second. Uh, Start the broadcast here. Forgive the wallpaper on my phone. Um, on with Metric Insights, we have native apps on iOS and Android, which is native mobile access to effectively the catalog that you were just looking at, but also those experiences. So similarly, this is kind of related to that catalog view that we were first looking at, where I can come in and navigate the full set of content that I might be interested in. But typically on the mobile device, I don't want to be looking through complex dashboards and reports. So starting me off in different types of mobile optimized versions of what I just showed you on the desktop. So maybe that first example where we were bubbling up certain charts from different Power BI content. Maybe let's bubble those charts up onto the mobile device and give me access to them so I can see them easily and straight away. Maybe it's more of that metric view that we were just looking at, where I can see the key metrics, how they're performing, and drill into, if I wanted, the uh, the detailed reports around here. And the way that works on the mobile device is if I drill into, say, the first metric here and it's coming from Tableau, we can deep link into the Tableau dashboard, which hopefully has a mobile optimized view to it as well. So if I did want to go and look at it in more detail. And then even things like, the My KPIs view that we looked at before, being able to customize the environment, obviously have it come over from the desktop environment. So, as a user, if I've set permission, if I've set a view up on the desktop, I want that to come through on my mobile device. I don't want to have to set it up again there, but I do potentially want the ability to be able to change it here as well and add in a different, metric that I might be interested in, or, filter that view out again to just focus on, what's changed today and making it as interactive as is useful to the user. So, doing small things like being able to see what the data points are easily and what the values are, but not making it so complex that I'm trying to filter and slice and dice a dashboard that has five different charts on that I can't really see because it's on a small factor of the phone. But give me the values of the key metrics, show me the metadata associated with them, and then when I'm back at my desktop, let me take that back because it's a familiar um, environment that I have across both form factors. So hopefully that's given you some ideas of how you can go from overwhelming people with content. I think we all acknowledge there's no lack of reporting and useful content out there today for users. It's really sort of addressing that problem of people's attention span. Their job is not to be an analyst every day, but how do we get the meaningful information that we put hours working into to create that content? How do we extract the meaningful information out of that and put it in front of users? So with that, we got a couple of questions, but feel free to enter more questions into the Q&A window. I'm just going to stop sharing on my phone device here. Let's go back to the desktop, bring up the slides again. So a couple of questions, Marius, that are coming through. Um, Okay, I feel like this one comes up a lot. Can you talk a little bit about security and permissions? You show content coming from different tools and technologies, and how that sort of floods through to the app concept as well, the custom experiences.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and obviously security has to be enforced at a number of different levels. So you're looking at obviously who has access to what content needs to be secured, and I think you might have noticed in some of Mike's examples. In fact, there was like a little lock icon on some of those items that like for some of the reports, and that actually would be like an access request kind of a mechanism that would be triggered. And the idea is that we synchronize the security model in Metric Insights in our case interface with the under either the underlying BI tool directly, Tableau, Power BI, whatnot, or through AD, synchronize through Entra ID or something of that nature to the association with categories for content. So one of those ways is done so that way people only users can only access directly, go through, click through to drill through into the items that they have access to through the existing security model, and that's all inherited. You don't have to reproduce anything in the tool. And then secondarily, if they don't have access, then you have a decision to make about whether you want to make it discoverable or not for the content. So that's the first key piece. Once you're looking at those KPIs, usually you want to have a security model on that as well. And there you're bringing in maybe some kind of row level security mapping so that if I've got key metrics, maybe I only see the sales for my region, or information for if I'm a country manager, maybe the information related to all the districts in my country or whatnot. So there's an added security level you can apply to the data itself. And then if you're clicking through the report, finally, we should recognize that obviously those reports are live, iframed or embedded through the embedding tools that are provided, supported by those vendors. And so therefore, running role level security is managed through identity there. So you've got SAML and single sign-on that connects. So there's a lot of information there, but the way to think about it is the identity needs to be managed, the access needs to be synchronized, whether you're using metric insights or building your own solution, synchronized, and then discoverability needs to be handled, and all that has to come together for the solution. And then obviously you need some kind of mapping beyond security for things like, well, I may have access to everything, but what do I have defaulted on my page? What are those 20 metrics that show up for me? And that has to be persona driven as well. So usually there's some mapping there that happens to say, well, this is the starting location for each user based on their group, or if it's not user selectable in that particular example, then here's the static list that's available to everyone. So all of that needs to be factored in.
Another question here. How do you think about design of these experiences by persona? I guess this question's related to how do you go about, you know, mapping some of the concepts to each persona?
Yeah, that's also a good question, and I think that the key thing to think about is you start from the user experience. So you really look at, if you can, ideally, you sit down with your users and understand kind of what their pain points are. What are the kinds of things they're trying to figure out day to day? What is their journey like today? What are the places where they're finding it awkward and difficult to find information and get an answer? So that's very important if you can get it. If you can't get that for some reason, because you're doing something much larger scale, you can oftentimes infer that information by looking at usage. So you can look at, what is a particular community of users, which dashboards are they looking at, most heavily, which tools are they using most, and then try to make a reasonable guess at that, and then of course you have to validate it after that. But that will then inform your journey because it says what is the content, what are the questions that need to be answered. If I know the questions that need to be answered, then I can really look at what are the relevant KPIs. If I understand the relevant KPIs, then I can ask the question, well, one of these KPIs trends in the wrong direction. What is the best resource available for somebody to ask that why question, right? Which then forms that linkage from the metric when you click into what is the thing that opens next, or what option of things am I giving you to open next. So all of that is sort of the approach. The other thing I will say that's I think kind of quite important to keep in mind, Mike showed you a lot of different ideas, and some of those have a much higher level of sophistication than others, and also require different levels of prerequisites. So, for example, if I'm going to do a metrics first perspective, a KPI first, which is absolutely best practice, I've got to be able to have those KPIs. I've got to be able to have them defined and loaded and make sure they're clean, because the last thing I want to do is show people numbers that are incorrect, right? So if you don't have that, but you still want to start making progress, there's no reason why you can't sort of take a crawl, walk, run approach, where you say, well, okay, let me first reduce the amount of time people have to do with finding content by just cataloging the content and bringing the right things in there and adding that metadata and creating experiences that are very persona driven in terms of at least show me only the dashboards that are relevant to me and the certified stuff and give me the context to understand what I'm looking at, right? That isn't going to solve all the problem by any measure, right? It's just going to be a first step, but it's a down payment that you can make towards addressing the return on effort disparity that's out there. You can start making progress with that, and in parallel, you can be doing the work to create the pristine environment of KPIs. You know those summaries at the right levels that you've pulled in, that you've validated. And then once those are ready, then you can graduate your users to more of a KPI-based approach where you're starting in with numbers and kind of further improve the return on effort calculus that you're generating for
We got time for one more here. How does the elephant in the room AI fit into all of this?
them. Yeah, that's a great point, and we didn't really, we spent a lot of time on AI and some of the other webinars. We didn't do that here, so maybe just I'll answer it sort of generically, and maybe there'll be some opportunities to illustrate some of these things in future masterclasses and/or webinars. But the idea is, if you think about it, you want AI to be today to be kind of part and parcel with the BI consumption experience, right? So those ought not to be divorced from each other. It's the same idea. If I have to answer a question, and first I have to go to my dashboard, and then I got to go find where I have that other agent. I got to go to, a Gemini room someplace. I mean, a Gemini, yeah, like whether you can go there or you go to a Databricks Genie space or something like that. It's not going to be that's not a great experience. So kind of integrating that into the same user experience is very important. So if you can imagine in any of these experiences that we showed you, if you have some data specific bots available, like say, for example, that KPI dashboard that Mike showed, where you've got the canvas, if you're able to maybe, if those things, let's say, are in a Snowflake or in Genie or in a semantic model, and then you can therefore surface those through a chat your data capability, whether that be Microsoft Fabric or Databricks or Snowflake or something custom you built. You want to be able to make that available right there. So you can imagine having a little icon where you can slide over a little panel and have a concierge experience or chatbot experience where you're asking the questions of the data and getting responses. So that if you want to, so it becomes an overlay, right? It's just like we like to think about all the power of the dashboards relative to Excel, but really they supplement a lot of things that people are doing in Excel today. Well, we should think of AI in this context as supplementing the experience, so weaving it into the experience where whether they're at the dashboard and they want to ask questions of the data, being able to slide out some kind of control where you can just ask questions and then have the scope limited to that, or whether you're just generally looking at a lot of KPIs and you want to ask questions about those, maybe even why questions, and have those answered. And that is a ultimately, and I know we're kind of getting, it's a pretty broad topic, but ultimately, if you think about it, the power and the promise of AI is being able to shorten that, not only that first time that first time to insight, because the first time to insight you can gain by properly organizing the data and presenting people the information. Oh, here's what's happening. But it's really that second time to insight, the one that goes from I know this is going on, but now I want to understand why. That's the place where it's hardest for people to use dashboards today because they don't know which dashboard, how to formulate the question. Sometimes the dashboards don't even answer those why questions very effectively. Whereas if you've got the right underlying data and the right semantic model, and you've gotten the right, sort of a conversational AI system in place, then you can answer that question by just the user asking it and the AI responding. And so the key is then bring that right into the experience so that it's there, and then people learn to use it, and they will start relying on it instead of going out to an analyst and asking the question because they can't answer it themselves.
Okay, I think we'll wrap there. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks to those who have joined throughout the series. As I mentioned up front, this is the last one in this particular series, but we'll definitely be back in the new year with more. But thank you, Marius, and hope everyone has a good holiday season.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks everyone for joining.